Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Scrubbed Show. I hope you've all been keeping well. Today we are joined by Dr. Philip Cruz, who is the Country Medical Director of UK for Moderna, who is a medical affairs expert, a pediatrician by background, and what I love most about him, he is now a content creator with his own podcast that has recently launched called The Pharma Medic, which we will talk about in a moment. But it is a real pleasure to have you on the show today, Philip. How are you?
Thank you very much, Abdul. I'm fine. I'm doing great. Thank you.
We have a lot to cover. You are a country medical director for a big pharma company. You are now a content creator, but we want to take it all the way back, Philip, to really go into your journey, your story. And I know you're a pediatrician by background, so do you mind starting there, telling us about your motivations to become a doctor, how you pursued a career in pediatrics?
Oh, definitely, with great pleasure. And I guess really the memory of my career choice goes back during my childhood, really, because I grew up in Brunei. So back then, we only had like one general hospital, and for pediatric care, sometimes you need to go abroad. And I guess my mom, because we're originally from the Philippines, and my mom brought me back to the Philippines to visit the pediatrician, and that was my impression of pediatrics, of medicine, a pediatrician. So that kind of like ingrained in me, and from early on, it's like I want to be a pediatrician as well. And yeah, it's more about really helping, healing, and everything that a would be doctor would want to go into. So yeah, that was my earliest memory. And then it was coupled with my interest in science, and I guess really it naturally flowed into medicine. So that was how it all came about.
How long were you practicing? And this is where it gets interesting, and this is what our listeners love hearing. How
Yes.
long were you doing pediatrics, clinical medicine, before endeavoring in what we start to call an alternative career, which I remember for you was around clinical trials? Tell
Yeah.
us about that transition pivot point.
Yeah, so with regards to medical affairs, it really during our time, it's not career path, so to speak, that's well known. And so, in
Hmm.
terms of pediatrics, I finished residency, which is a form of specialization in the Philippines, in the Philippine General Hospital, which is the biggest tertiary hospital in the country.
Hmm.
Back then, it was really clinical care. So I did clinical care for 5 years after
Hmm.
specialization, and I loved it. I mean, I was looking after patients, dealing with all sorts of childhood illnesses, and of course, immunizations and vaccinations were essential to the practice of pediatrics. And then an opportunity came up where I could be part of a clinical trial. Back then, it was a clinical trial for a vaccine against influenza, and that got me on board, and that got me interested into looking the conduct of how a clinical trial is done. And that's where I was made aware of the different processes, different requirements, of course, the different SOPs, rules, and manner of how to conduct clinical trials, and of course the essence of maintaining patient safety all throughout. And then that kind of like, okay, what else can I do? And then looking at the research track and R&D, it got me into looking into the companies and to the pharmaceutical industry. And it's kind of like an
Hmm.
intersection of science, patient care. Also, there's a sense of strategic mindsets and
Yeah.
entrepreneurial mindset as well. So it's kind of like a mix, a confluence of all of these, which kind of attracted me and picked my interest. And yeah, and that's where I kind of discovered, oh, there is another career path to tread upon. And so that's where
Mm.
I explored more, got to know more, and then an opportunity came up where I became a medical advisor. That's kind of like the entry level into medical affairs that I took
Hmm.
as a medical advisor.
Tell us a bit more about the skill set. And I really want to get into this. When you were a clinician, how was life different when you were in the kind of clinical trials, the research trials? Did you have a skill set that was adaptable, or did you have to learn something new?
Oh, I had to learn lots of things that I knew. But of course, there is that foundational knowledge and skill set that you should have, especially when you are part of the clinical trial team. basics would be
Hmm.
the knowledge around good clinical practice, which is the standard for doing clinical trials, but everything also that goes with the clinical monitoring, how to supervise, maintaining oversight over clinical trials, how to address issues, how to report them. So it's very much regimented. There's a certain structure and flow. And so also that takes into account a certain mindset of how to be
Hmm.
and thrive in a career in clinical trials. And that speaks to another path. Beyond
Hmm.
medical affairs, there's also clinical development. And therefore, this kind of like broaden and open doors to my mind in terms of
Yeah.
really having a core competency of being a medic, a doctor, a physician. And then this is where you can thread on this path. There's so many roles right now when you look at
Yeah.
industry that you could go into. So this really goes to show how the field has matured in terms of competencies, in terms of skill sets, roles. And that's one area that I have been very active in mentoring would be doctors and medics and healthcare professionals who want to go into a career in industry.
Philip, I just want to pause it here for a moment, right? So you talked about this transition phase, right? You've been a clinician at this point for 5 years as a pediatrician. What was sort of saying inside you? What was the itch that was getting you to say, go and explore more?
Yeah,
Why were you looking for more?
that's a very, very insightful question because it really made me reflect. Because at this point, there was this possibility that I could help not just one patient, but a multitude of patients, a community, or even a country, or a
Hmm.
region, if you go into a regional medical affairs role. And so that possibility of broadening your scope and having that growth mindset really was something that attracted me into going into the industry. Because yes, there are certain ways that you can help patients, and this is one other way, and more patients at that.
Mm.
So it's kind of like a win-win.
Yeah,
But that's
no,
incredible.
I completely resonate around that. But I want to ask you this moment now. So when you decided to move into this industry phase, what were your friends and everyone else around you saying when you were like, yeah, I'm going to go and do that?
Well, understandably, back then, the pharmaceutical industry hasn't been really, in terms of the good side of, let's say, even the news, and you have different
Yeah.
perceptions of some
Mm.
companies acting badly. There's this impression that, and I guess I won't need to go far. I mean, my mom was telling me when I visited her one time, saying, "Oh, I put you into medical school. I was envisioning you to have a clinic." And see patients.
Yeah.
But now you're going to an office? You're not seeing patients? You have a weekend and all you do is watch TV? What are you doing? Where did my investment in you in your medical education go? And this is where I think it dawned upon me how the best way to explain it, and especially to a mother who sees the role of a physician, seeing patients and
Yeah.
trying to get to her that, oh, I am treating now a community or a country through medical programs and the like. So it takes a bit of patience and explaining and trying to get over the barriers
Mm.
of a perception, a bias of industry. And also, it's kind of like what it's being seen that those in industry only want to sell, 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 promote, promote, promote,
Mm.
and sell. It is a business, but it's all about, as what we say here in the UK with regards to the code of practice, it's ethical promotions. You can promote, but do it ethically. There are
Mm.
certain standards and clauses that are there in terms of
Mm.
the code, and companies need to behave along that manner of sticking to the code of practice. Since then, thankfully, there's an evolution of behavior, of ethics, compliance. I think it's more ethics and compliance to ethics, and companies are well aware of the impact of this in the business because it's more
Mm.
a long-term gain. Because looking at the cases
Mhm.
previously of some companies in the wrong, it's they're after a short-term win and then not realizing that the impact will come back and bite them if they don't act in this manner. And so I guess really it has transformed. And it's good as well for the growth of the industry as a whole.
No,
Absolutely.
definitely. Going back to your journey, you then became part of the medical affairs community, medical affairs manager at Big Pharma. tell us about what that role entailed, what you did, because a lot of our listeners are thinking, I
Yes.
want to do that role, but I don't know what the role entails. So please share some insight on there.
Yeah, definitely. And I guess really let's start off with addressing perceptions. Because when you
Mm-hmm.
say that, okay, you are the part of the medical department of a pharmaceutical industry, so it's now evolved into one that has a strategic role. It's not just signing
Mm-hmm.
off stuff or materials, very much a two-dimensional role. I now would compare it as even a four-dimensional, where you look at the scientific, obviously, which is foundational, clinical, but and also governance has that in it, but also strategic, and more importantly, and this is the crucial role of medical, is to tie all of those in and put it into right front center of the patient. Basically, what I'm trying to say is the patient should be at the center of everything that we do. So if there's an impasse or there's some ambiguity, it all boils down to everyone. What is the impact to the patient? And I heard earlier also in a podcast, in another podcast, we're treating patients, we're not treating diseases. And therefore, you need to keep that mindset eventually. How does this affect the patient? And you, as part of the medical team, incorporating that patient voice, because you have the experience and the skill set of treating patients, knowing what's for the patient's benefit. And that's where you come in and provide that feedback, insight, and guidance. And of course, nowadays you work with patients directly. You could. There are patient advocacy groups, specialized groups, and so you could bring that voice easily. But nonetheless, you as a healthcare professional going into industry, you bring that value into the company's ethos, language, business strategies, day to day, and being part of a cross-functional team. And that is a term that is widely used in industry. What does that mean? It means cross-functional. You work with a team with different functions. Let's say I work with someone who has a commercial role, someone who has a marketing role. I also work with someone with a safety, pharmacovigilance role, or someone who has a communication side of it, because companies also have that department of communications and media. So, and also legal, obviously, and compliance and the like, and HR. But that's where you have to see that a core competency of being in this industry is that you can work with people. I mean, you have to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. You have to be very much so that you maintain your direction, be steadfast, be a team player, and get and be mindful of each and everyone. And this is what I say often. It's not just your intelligence quotient, it's also your emotional intelligence that matters, and what
Definitely.
would make you successful in this industry. Having that balance, or sometimes having more of EQ or emotional quotient or emotional intelligence, is the key to success. I mean, that is what
No.
makes everything human, patient focused, putting that EQ into it, into the equation.
Absolutely. I want to pick up on one particular skill you mentioned. Someone recently said to me that most doctors, most people in the healthcare space, healthcare professionals working in service provision, they're not very commercially trained, not commercially savvy. We're very poor with even our personal finances.
Yes.
How did you go about learning all of that, learning how business and commercial goals can coexist with healthcare in the sense of industry? How did you learn all of that, and how can our audience also learn as well?
Definitely, it's not just the financial skills, because definitely it's more having a growth mindset. And this is where we place very much a focus or an emphasis on personal development. Let me possibly put a quote in this in terms of hiring. This is how I would like to see companies do. So we hire for attitude, we train for skills. Because in the long run, it's all about really how that person acts and exists in the company. We don't hire for someone being an expert, but then getting into the role, the person struggles because the person doesn't have the right attitude, not the right mindset. So you could learn, and it's more. Of course, you have certain criteria, let's say, of getting into or being hired to a job, but more importantly, because you would be in a pool of 100 applicants, all having the same
Mm.
CV or credentials and educational attainments, but it's more what can we can read between the lines. Will this person
Yeah.
be a
Mm.
natural fit into the company culture? Again, that is another term that possibly our listeners and our viewers would kind of like, okay, what's that? A company culture really is the ethos. It's kind of like what the company says as a common theme of how they work. You know, they can always say from we work for the welfare of patients or something to that extent, to that regard. But what does it mean on a day-to-day basis? And this is where I think really we need to reflect on, okay, when you look at the job description, does this resonate to me? Is this something that I see myself doing on a
Mm.
daily basis? So that transition and that kind of, I wouldn't say fear, but skepticism, financial spreadsheets, budget planning. I don't have any clue what that means. That's fine. We don't need you to be an expert. Just an average
Mm.
working understanding would be enough to get you into a role, and then you expand and tweak it according what you need to do medically. You are a medic first and
Mm.
foremost. The other skill set you will get as you are in your day-to-day job, because I also believe, and this is from a previous company, 70% is you learn on the job, and this is with the skill set
Mm.
knowledge. 70% on the job, 20% you get from coaching and mentoring. Look for mentors, look for role
Mm.
models, coaching. And the 10% would be didactics, modules, attend conferences, learn, lecture. And so that's kind of like the equation that you get your medical affairs knowledge, skill set by. It's with that equation and with that growth mindset coupled with that attitude, sprinkling with a bit of resiliency and communication skills,
Mm.
you're good to go into the oven. And I
Mm.
guess really what I meant
I
by
love
that
this.
is you need time. When you go into the oven, you need time to have a well baked cake, for example. You need time. And
Mm.
that's something that I'd like to highlight also to everyone is don't be in a rush. 1 year, just enroll. I want to be promoted. I've seen
Yeah.
that throughout my
Mm.
career and in different companies and different roles. People become impatient. But the thing is, it's a tincture of time. You learn as you go along. And sometimes looking at my CV, actually, you'll see that there are like 3 year intervals. And I guess really just roughly
Mm.
that's how I feel personally. And this is my personal view on this. 3 years. First year, you get into the role, integrate yourself, be introduced, try to fit in. Second year is when you, okay, get the hang of it, you perform, you excel. Third year is when you become broader and more strategic, helping out more. And so that's kind of like
Mm.
how you progress. And that's where you can say, okay, I'm ripe for a move or a promotion. And so, well, of course, there are other examples where after pro- possibly 1.5 or 2 years that this is a high performer and there is an opportunity to gain more experience or be in a different role, a higher challenge. Why not? But also
Mm.
that's kind of like a risk as well. You need to pace
Mm.
yourself. That's one thing that I'd like to share with everyone is the proverbial this is a marathon, not a sprint, and try to pace yourself. Of course, there are certain pressures in the company where you need to be really at a high level all the time. It goes with
Mm.
experience now that you need when to, be on really accelerator mode, but be just close enough to excel because there is a line obviously with doing more and burnout. So you need to be mindful, and this is where
Yeah.
I always
Mm.
advise medics and those in medical affairs, take care of yourself. I mean, there are reminders. When
Mm.
you go and fly in an airplane, the safety briefing will always tell you take care of yourself first before helping out
Mm.
others. So that's a message also I'd like to remind everyone. We are not bulletproof. We are not. So we need to be very mindful to take care of ourselves.
That's incredible. And this is why I love doing this podcast with senior established experts like yourself, because you've had that time, you've had the opportunity to mature and really understand. which goes to my next question. You were at a Big Pharma as a medical affairs manager. You eventually became the vaccine director in the UK. Tell us about this career progression. Why was it Philip that got promoted? How did Philip become the UK director instead of, colleague 2, 3, and 4? What was it about you, Philip, that we can replicate?
First of all, Abdul, let me just thank you for your very kind words. Your check is in the post. It will arrive soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'm joking. Obviously not. We are friends here.
Yeah, of course.
Um,
Yeah.
and very, very insightful question again, because it was a turning point in my career. For me,
Mhm.
when I look back at that milestone, I'll call it a milestone because I was then a regional medical affairs director based in Singapore, taking care of the Asia Pacific region. And then this opportunity came up to lead a team in the UK. First of all, I had to
Mhm.
pinch myself because it sounds too good to be true. But I had to apply for it, to be fair. And I guess really what really became my success factor, first of all, is create a brand that describes you. And I had the benefit
Mm.
of creating that brand and displaying it in full view to the company. So my brand was I was good with interacting with external stakeholders. I was good in front
Mm.
of policymakers. I was good at communication and presenting data in front of advisors, opinion leaders. And so that was my brand. And they saw that, okay, possibly that this would work for in the UK. And that's kind of like how I built and leveraged, I would say. More importantly, is to understand the environment. And of course, coming from Asia, it's quite daunting. Moving halfway around the world.
Mm.
And I was working with developing countries who have really meager resources for vaccination programs back then. And so I was highlighting the value
Mm.
of why countries and public health programs would go into investing for immunization programs. And that's what I brought, realizing that value, having that different perspective, a holistic, a more broad perspective on the environment and public health, being known to have good interactive skills, communication, and more importantly, looking at the bigger picture of things, not being bogged down by execution of strategies, but more importantly, you need to understand the whys. Why are we doing this? Not just what are we doing
Mm.
and how are we doing this and when. More importantly, focus on the whys. I guess it's very Simon Sinek
No.
where you look
Mm.
at the whys because that
Yeah.
translates. If there's one question that I could bring with me every time, it's why. Because if you go into a governance meeting,
Mm.
a compliance meeting, they say, oh, we want to do this. Is this compliant with the ABPI code? You ask them for the intent. Why are you doing this? Why? Why? What do you want to get out of it? So it starts with why. And that's where kind of like
Mm.
how broadly I saw myself. And more importantly, realizing what your challenges that you will face. And so I had a deep think about, oh, when I arrive in the shores of the UK, what would be the challenges that I will be faced with? So having
Mm.
a plan, they call it famously the 100-day plan or something to that extent, like a CEO.
Mm.
So have that in mind. How would you see yourself integrating medical affairs, your brand of medical affairs, into the local business? And this is what you will speak with in terms of the general manager or the hiring manager, the leaders of the organization that you will work with. And that's part of how integration seamlessly integrating yourself seamlessly into the company would go. And so for me, that was quite, like I said, a milestone move because looking back, I was like, wow. And it's funny because looking at that, and my career has not always been me getting what I wanted for my career. But what I've learned is that when a window closes, a door of opportunity opens. And then looking back, I realized,
Mm.
oh,
Mm.
right. Good thing I didn't get that because this happened. Oh, now I
Mm.
understand why I didn't get that role that I applied for. I wasn't ripe back then in terms of experience,
Mm,
skill set. I was really too excited, too motivated about the possibilities of the role, not realizing, oh, hang on, am I really the right fit?
mm.
So that's kind of like how, possibly looking back, all of those thoughts gathered in my mind.
No, that's amazing. It reminds me of the Steve Jobs quote of you can only connect the dots looking backwards. When I'm speaking to you, it feels I'm speaking as if like you're an entrepreneur outside the box thinker versus a corporate individual, which is the perception pharma tends to have. Even the references to Simon Sinek and Start with Wise,
Yeah.
I didn't expect to hear.
Yeah.
Tell us about this diet content appetite. Where are you consuming your knowledge and experiences and information from? Where are you going? How do you build your growth mindset and knowledge?
Oh, definitely, Abdul. So you talked about thinking out of the box. Step away from that. Let's make our own box. And this is where, going
Mm,
back to what I mentioned about creating your brand, this is where you need to spend time, not just executing, doing strategies, but also thinking about, did it really attain its objective? Because I think really young medical affairs professionals, they're much preoccupied with doing it well. But
mm,
I guess really, and this is what I would borrow from ChatGPT, it's not about finding the right answer, but it's all about asking the right question. That is what matters.
Mm,
So, in what I refer to now as creating the box, find the right questions that you need to ask to get into an objective. Because sometimes we talk about, oh, these are what we need. These are the answers that I want answered. But then we don't invest much time into, okay, are we asking the right questions? Are we asking the right people? So it's kind of like also being reflective in that sense, and what I mean by creating your own box. And therefore, don't be limited.
mm,
Don't think that, okay, I can only do this because I'm constrained about this. Even the challenge of having no resources. Let's say you don't have a budget. You aren't given a budget. And sometimes medical's budget in the companies is much, much less. And therefore, you need to be more creative on how you get your job done. And that shouldn't put you
mm,
off. There are ways to going about it. And then that's where possibly the practice of medicine, going into medical school or nursing school, pharmacy school, where there are different ways to arrive at a certain diagnosis or certain
mm,
care. What if there isn't an MRI available to diagnose this patient? Go back to your basic
mm,
clinical skills. So don't be daunted by setbacks, roadblocks, and therefore always look forward
mm,
as well. And this is what is important, because when you drive, do you drive by looking at the rear view mirror? You drive by looking straight.
no.
And this is why it's important for young professionals to understand, if things don't go your way, don't be bogged down in, oh gosh, wish I could have done it this way.
Mm,
You spend 30 minutes, an hour, the whole morning regretting things that, oh, should have done that. Recognize the mistakes, learn from it, but move on. Move on. And that's where experience has taught me to become wiser and more very much forward looking, if I may say so.
Philip, I'd like you to give us some insight now into, because I've got this image of this person who is speaking to lots of external stakeholders, who is
Yes.
doing a lot of self development, reading and learning from podcasts, Simon Sinek, and everything else. What does a week in your life look like? What does it look like when you're leading your team? What does it look like when you're at work and when you're not at work? I want to really understand what a
Yes.
week looks like.
Yeah, no, definitely. Of course, you have the work week where you have all the work related activities that is related, obviously, to medical affairs. But what I'd like to touch upon are the
mm,
other competencies that I am very much looking into developing myself. I'm an advocate for effective communications. I love topics on how to get messages across. I love topics about how to
mhm,
present,
Mm,
presentation skills. Oh, I have tons of books on that. Watching how you read body language as well. More importantly, I think as a broad
love
category,
that.
how I equip myself is learning about emotional intelligence. I've mentioned it earlier, but I can't
mm,
overstate it or understate or whatever. Emotional intelligence is key. It's the thread that weaves the fabric of medical affairs and how you interact in a team. And that has brought me more value. And this is what I talk as well to people. And basically, it's more how you present yourself as well. So being mindful.
Mm.
Aside from, of course, we love podcasts. I watch videos as well, read books, and then more importantly, as I mentioned earlier as well, have a mentor and a coach.
Mm.
When I first came to the UK from Asia, I was given an executive coach, a leadership coach, I should have said, because, and this is now just sharing with you the challenge
Mm.
I had where in Asia culturally you don't speak up, you are seen but not heard because of course the
Mm.
hierarchy and it's very much reserved, and you see that another topic probably you could go into in future episodes that you would plan is the difference as a cultural different workplaces geographically. In some
Mm.
Mm.
work
True.
cultures, this is fine. In others, it's not. But just going back to my point, it's that realization that you need to be very much mindful of the different nuances, let's say, of how you come across. So
Amazing. From your experience, you've progressed to more and more senior leadership positions to now becoming the medical director for UK at Moderna, which obviously after COVID brought so much light to, a global sensation overnight to say. Tell us a bit more about what makes a good leader. What are some of the difficulties and challenges you faced? And for people that are also going into senior, similar leadership roles, what advice do you have for those leaders?
oh wow, that's a very should I say tough question, because leadership can mean so many things to different people. It's not just act of
Mm.
influencing. But of course, for me, leadership is inclusive, meaning you get everyone focused on one thing, so you have a synergy of efforts, and that's kind of like how you lead. So
Mhm.
my style would be more of inclusive leadership, and I also
Mhm.
demonstrate leadership on um, a day-to-day basis, being consistent and walk the talk. That's one aspect of
Mm.
leadership that I find very valuable. Being compassionate, empathetic, it's also important. And at the same time, the level of really bringing the mindfulness of how you do and how you are being seen as a leader and
Mm.
influence by doing your job effectively and being open, transparent, honest. So I guess really the common theme there is being consistent in what you say and how you do. So that's kind of like how I would interpret it.
No, that's amazing.
An important question right now. Looking back, looking through all those years of moving from clinical work into industry, clinical trials, I want to ask you: do you feel fulfilled so far with your career to date?
Oh
And
yeah,
tell us, what is it that is so fulfilling?
a big yes, definitely. And not just the patients that
Mm.
I would have loved to have benefited from all the medicines or vaccines that I've worked on. Also, in terms of
Mm.
developing future leaders as well. Being on this
Amazing.
podcast, being here and sharing my story, for me, it's very fulfilling. And that's kind of like the essence
Mm.
of how I see myself contributing. So it's if you are in a situation where you can still contribute, you are very productive. That is, for me, the pinnacle of success is being able to give back, because I believe in that in terms of giving back. When you have received so much, and in fact it should be that you should give back more, and that's how I,
Mm.
I
Mm.
would see it. And it's all about good karma. It's all about having a good vibe and spreading positivity,
Mm.
because you know you don't need to add to the negativity in this world. I mean, there's so much already
It's
out
enough.
there.
Yeah.
And so
Mm.
for me, it's for how do I make a difference by being positive. So it's like an equation when you think of it. Positive difference equals something. So it's all about being motivated. And for me, again, just also providing another answer of leadership. If I can turn you to the best version of you, not a better version of someone
Mm.
else, that's where I can say I've
Amazing.
accomplished being a leader. I only want to see the best version of you. That's our goal. That's how we will work together to attain that. I will guide you along the way, show you, but definitely it should be your journey. But at the end of the journey, or even at the latter part, you should be at the best version of you.
That's amazing. No, I love that. And that's nicely comes onto a bit which I do want to talk about is you're at the top of your field. You are a country medical director, and yet you are now embarking on a different adventure as a content creator with the Pharma Medic podcast, which I'm going to link below. This is very someone at your stage. I very rarely see them dabble into this type of environment. So keen to hear the story, the reason why, what your experience has been so far.
Yeah, and thank you very much. But first of all, I'd like to state that, of course, even here at this show, all the views are just my own and in no reference tied to the company or even previous companies I've worked with. It's just my own, just to put it out there. But I guess, again, just going back, it's an
Of course.
advocacy, just like you and I. We have an advocacy. That's the reason why we're doing this, is to really reach out to more, educate them, give them another perspective, and provide the context and relevance through our real life world experience. So that's kind of like how we see ourselves, right?
How has the experience of creating that content been? Do you feel that you've unlocked a more creative side? Because sometimes in our corporate roles and jobs, we can't exercise creativity, right? Because of compliance and regulations. How has this been for you, this experience?
At the same, I mean, we work with certain standards, and still, definitely, I need to be mindful of that compliance
Of course.
requirement, obviously. So it's being insightful. It's a journey. I don't want to be overwhelmed at the beginning of this journey. And the thing is, one thing I've learned that I have watched is I will make mistakes. I mean, definitely. And I'm sure if you read the first and saw your and listened to your first podcast, you would like cringe it, like, oh gosh.
I
Yeah,
don't want
it's
to
all
even go back there. I don't want to
yeah,
even listen.
exactly. See, so it's very much along those lines as well. Be more forgiving towards yourself. Don't be too hard.
Who is your number one role model? You've got this incredible, positive, infectious energy about you. I'm sitting here and I'm feeling really energized by you. Who is your number one role model that has shaped everything about you?
Easy. My parents. I mean, they have been my role models. They've passed. But my parents, and the reason why I say that's because they provided me with the inspiration to think big, because they were a couple of they were based in the Philippines. They were looking for opportunities. It was a bit of a struggle, and then they saw this opportunity in Brunei, and then they took hold of that opportunity, maximized it, went to Brunei. And one interesting experience and story, pardon me for sharing it, but back then it was literally, so my dad was a civil engineer. He did the roads and bridges in Brunei. My mom was an English teacher. And there were a few immigrants who went there. And one of the roles was to build and help build the country. And it was a tropical country. And of course, there were still jungles. And I remember in our house, which had big windows, wide open windows, during lunchtime, we need to, as kids, watch over our food, or else the monkeys will come and get our food. And that showed the environment that we were in. And my dad was pretty much braving the jungles, making those roads, and my mom working so hard. And so that the hardworking nature, being adventurous at the same time, taking calculated risks. So that's something that I always look to in terms of how they did that in the 60s, where really, I mean, obviously they didn't have the technologies we have now. So they encountered so many challenges and they overcame it. So they have inspired me to where I am now. And it's also being very much respectful. And so I look towards role models who provide that and command respect. And those are the people I listen. And of course, and similarly, those who went through a journey through adversity. So I look to them for inspiration as well. And I try to mimic at least a certain percentage or a fraction of how they are. Or I think, again, going back to creating your own box. I'd like to create my own brand, getting bits and pieces. And that's how
Oh wow.
everyone should face it. Be your own. So get bits and pieces of, oh, this person is good at this. I want to be like this person. But this person is better at this. So I like, because look at it this way. Everyone probably have had their share of not so good line managers and leaders. Even that has value because then don't be like them. I've had my
Yeah.
share. So it's very much look into that and say, oh, okay, this is one trait that I will not and ever be. So you can learn either way. So it's all about, again, going back to that growth mindset. It builds to my growth, even though it's a negative experience now. I will learn from it. I will become better of it and move on.
A question. We talk about building a brand, and it's we instantly understand what you mean. But I know that the listeners we have from across the globe, they might not necessarily know what it means to build a brand. Do you
Yeah,
mind sharing some practical tips or ways of building a strong brand in pharma
yeah, of course.
or in your career as a whole, actually?
And exactly, yeah. And it's all about having a statement built that describes your brand. So if I may put my idea of a podcast in mind, I have 10, well, less than 10 sentences. So it's explaining pharmaceutical medical affairs through real world experience and insight. That's how I provide views on certain topics through my real world experience and I give my insight. And that's how I think it's pretty much not just confined to the industry. In any industry, you should have and build your brand, let's say, and how people will remember you by. That is more important. How do you think that if you leave the company and then people then, oh, do you know Dr. Philip Cruz? Oh, yeah, he's the guy who is excellent at giving presentations on PowerPoint, for example. So that's
Yeah.
something that you should be mindful. How would people describe you? That's something probably that having that mindset would help you out in the long term.
No, I agree. My favorite definition, and it's very difficult to describe, is similar to what you said. Your personal brand, your brand is the story they tell about you when you're not in the room. That's the
Exactly.
narrative. Yeah. And people are always building a narrative around you, so why not own it and control it? That's why
Yes.
it's so important to have a strong brand. The final question I want to ask before we wrap up is, looking back at your career, what are you most proud of? What is one of your greatest achievements? And what are you looking forward to the next leg of your journey, your career?
And what comes to mind is the times where someone in the audience, let's say, or in a meeting, a healthcare professional, an expert, comes up to me saying, that was a great presentation. That was a great discussion of science, Dr. Cruz. Thank you very much. The positive feedback that you get, oh, that is so valuable. That really is more an adrenaline rush for me. It's inspirational. So that's kind of like how I see the experiences, the positivity that is out there. So that's
Yeah.
very memorable.
And what are you looking forward to for the future?
Especially if I may mention it, and sorry for forgetting that part of the question, it's incorporating digital. You're now in an era of AI. And so looking probably at data optimization, how we do medical affairs, incorporating AI, let's say, or iterations of it, looking at digital virtual engagement methods, data analytics, how you look at data, how you identify problems using AI and being more targeted. That is exciting. That's what I'm looking forward in the future. Incorporating more technology in what we do. Obviously, it's not about replacing. I don't think it will be our role as humans will be replaced. But take note, I'm being very
It will
kind to.
change.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm being kind to ChatGPT. I always ask, please, good morning, because I don't want to be in a time where they will dominate the world and this is the guy who doesn't say good morning to me. It's
Yeah, I'm
but
the same. I'm very polite to my chat GPT as well. I'm
exactly.
very polite.
So it gives the
Oh,
idea
no.
that Abdul is a very polite person. We should spare him. But seriously going back, it's
No,
the importance of looking at personalization, tailor fit approach.
yeah,
That is something that I look forward to. That is something that I like to work on. Understanding technology
mm,
for me is very much, again, going back to how I see myself and possibly creating another brand, providing a digital
amazing.
medical affairs type mindset would be something exciting.
Love that.
It has been genuinely a pleasure, Philip. And I say that's because I thought this conversation will be a very different type of conversation, whereas it's turned more around growth mindset, emotional intelligence, genuine positivity. And having listened to you, I now understand where you are in the position you are in as a leader, as an expert, as someone that's very well respected, having listened to that in a short period of time. So I want to thank you so sharing that journey. And for our listeners, I'm going to share the link to your LinkedIn. I'm going to share the link to your podcast. And we also have a few more medical affairs now listening to this podcast because of our pharma guests, some insights from the experiences you share in your podcast. So thank you so much once again, Philip.
Thanks so much for that.
Pleasure is all mine. Thank you as well for giving me this opportunity. Amazing. And keep up the great work that you are doing.
No,